Welcome everyone to the Tiara Virtual Roundtable. We do these 2 or 3 times a year, and I'm happy to welcome you on behalf of Tiara International. I'm Peg Rowe, and I'm our moderator as well as one of the Tiara partners. This month, we're going to be focusing on mindfulness in the workplace. One of the things that we do in Tiara when we pick the topics is that we look for something that feels topical and of the moment. And given that we are still in the midst of the pandemic, this particular topic has really emerged as one that's been interesting and that a lot of people are grappling with. So we'll explore mindfulness as part of well-being and really take a look at, what are the impacts of using mindfulness and why would it be something that we would want to add to our repertoire of practices that we use. And today I've invited 4 experts who are going to bring great insight and perspective for both their personal use of mindfulness as well as the way that they've introduced mindfulness into their workplaces. So let me first introduce our panelists. So first I'm going to introduce Carrie Lydon, who is the Director of Student Wellness at the University of Chicago at Booth. And so this is a really interesting role that Carrie's in. It's not a common role that we see in university settings, and yet it has so much interesting application right now. So we'll be interested to hear from Carrie as well. And then Jennifer Conley is both a consultant and a coach as well as a mindfulness expert. So she works with organizations and companies on a variety of consulting topics, as well as bringing mindfulness into her personal practice. And then she also teaches mindfulness. So she is both an expert in mindfulness, as well as someone who has the opportunity to observe mindfulness in organizations. Then I want to introduce Petra Van Daren, who is coming to us from the Netherlands. So welcome, Petra, in a completely different time zone. And Petra is a safety and health expert and professional. And she's worked in a variety of manufacturing settings, among other things. And she's currently with the 𝐤𝐚𝐽 company. And then lastly, I want to introduce 𝐤𝐚𝐽, and 𝐤𝐚𝐽 is a partner in a law firm, and her law firm is Goldman Ishmael, Tomaselli, Brennan, and Baum. That's a mouthful. And 𝐤𝐚𝐽 is someone who not only, again, practices mindfulness, but has had a really interesting journey bringing it into her law firm. So with that, we will go ahead and get started. Behind the scenes, we have Sydney Alderson, who's one of our TR team members, and she's producing the show for us today. She's also managing the chat box. So if you have a question and you would like for us to know what that question is, simply put it in the chat box and Sydney will make sure that we get that, and we'll try to incorporate that in our dialogue today. Great, so let's go ahead and get started. First of all, I just want to set the stage. Mindfulness is a term that we hear a lot, and it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So I thought it would be a good idea for us to get a basic definition of mindfulness. What do we mean when we say mindfulness? So Carrie, I'm going to go ahead and start with you. How do you define mindfulness?
For me, I use a really simple definition that's based on Jon Kabat-Zinn's definition, who is one of the sort of thought leaders in mindfulness-based stress reduction and kind of a meditation expert. And his definition is basically bringing awareness to the present moment without judgment, which means that mindfulness can really be a variety of things, and that we have the capability of doing it at any given time. So awareness in the present moment without judgment.
Great. And Petra, I love you have kind of an abbreviated version of that is, let me count them, 5 words. So what is your definition of mindfulness?
Oh, and it's maybe it's building on what Carrie is saying. Yeah. It's paying attention to your attention.
Yes. So I love that, sort of like really short and to the point. And before we dive more into the benefits of mindfulness, Jennifer, I'm going to ask you if you would share what would a couple of daily practices look like for mindfulness. And the reason I'm asking that is that people often who don't practice mindfulness have an idea that this is a really big time investment. This is something you have to spend an hour doing. And I think it's really important today that people take away that it's actually a series of simple practices that you can do throughout your day whenever you need to bring your attention back to the present moment.
I love that. Thank you. So one could be mindfully brushing your teeth. I did it this morning, and it's listening to the sound of the toothbrush. It's noticing the bubbles. It's tasting the taste. So for me, you know, mindfulness is a full sensory experience of the moment. So brushing your teeth, things we do every day, right? Taking a sip of your coffee and thinking about the plant and thinking about the sun and the rain that nourished that coffee, and just really allowing that sip of coffee to be a full aware sensory experience. Throwing something in the recycling bin and mindfully being present to a worry that's arising in you, and just being tender and aware, oh, I can tell this thought is arising. And so I think there's a tenderness in the way that you can bring mindfulness into your day, including when you're feeling stressed.
Great.
So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. I just wanted to sort of set the tone for when we say mindfulness practices, what are the things that we're actually talking about for anyone who might not be engaging in those right now. So if we think about this basic definition of bringing attention to the present moment without judgment, I will confess that the without judgment part is often the part that trips me up a little bit. So for those of you who are considering this, you might find that as well. But I think that's an important element of it. So we want to make sure that we're really acknowledging that the intention is to, as Petra would say, bring your attention to your attention and see what you're really paying attention to in that present moment. So now that we've had this kind of basic definition of mindfulness, 𝐤𝐤, would you share from both a personal and professional perspective, why do you feel it's important?
Well, I think mindfulness helps us to focus on what's happening right now instead of the stress of what's coming up that can be so overwhelming. So in our jobs as trial lawyers, we're always thinking about court deadlines or big trials or hearings or depositions coming up, and focusing on, okay, well, this is what I'm doing right now, and this is how what I can accomplish in this moment. And also sort of thinking about how you're feeling in the moment. So if you're feeling overwhelmed and unprepared, you can say, oh, look, I'm feeling unprepared. And then when the deposition or the hearing happens and everything goes fine, then later after that, you can notice by being mindful that, oh, look, it went fine, even though before I was so anxious about it. So the next time you're doing the same activity again, you can go back to your database of successes and remember that, in fact, even though you felt like you were anxious and stressed about something, it actually ended up being fine.
Yeah, thank you. Because one of the things that I'm noticing is that, you know, in addition to my awareness that other people are beginning to really think about mindfulness, it's also in America, at any rate, in the States, finding its way into, you know, even, you know, popular newspapers like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, who both within the last 2 weeks had articles about the stress of the pandemic, what it's causing people, and cited mindfulness practices as one of the ways that people are choosing to deal with that. So we haven't typically found mindfulness sort of on the front pages, if you will, but I think it's important that we're really recognizing that this constant state of uncertainty, which is a lot of what the pandemic is, has us in a chronically kind of low state of stress. Even if we're doing a good job of managing it, we're under kind of this constant stress because we don't know what's going to happen. And so mindfulness really is this helpful practice, as Jennifer said, that we can do throughout the day. So it's not, it's not relegated to, oh, in the morning I do it for an hour and then hope I get through my day. It's really ongoingly. And 𝐤𝐤's examples were great examples of ongoingly, how do you bring your attention back to that present moment? So let's talk a little bit about how mindfulness does help in dealing with uncertainty and stress. And Carrie, you work specifically with MBA students, which I find fascinating that it's now integrated into part of the curriculum for the MBA students at Booth. So would you share a little bit about what are the stressors that they experience and how is mindfulness helping them?
Absolutely. So our students are pretty phenomenal. They're coming from kind of all over the world, all different industries, and they all tend to be high performers in their careers. And so when they come to Booth, they are in a situation where they're surrounded by high performers and are then looking to take the next step in their career, in addition to being in a demanding graduate program. So there's a lot of stressors just around sort of being able to sort of keep up and do well. And I think just the personality types tend to be those who are sort of on the go, really, again, high performing, high functioning. And so along with that often comes stress, just in general. And so part of what we have tried to do is to integrate different mindfulness practices, as well as wellness overall, into the I'll say curriculum, not necessarily classroom, but just curriculum of the school, so that they can they're able to manage some of those stresses. And I would say, just like everyone else who is listening, everything that was stressful before is even a little more stressful now during the pandemic. And so, you know, what we've seen this year is just more isolation, uncertainty about the job market and where things will go. So those additional stressors are already layered onto a pretty demanding experience otherwise.
Excellent. Great. So let's switch our attention, Petra, to what happens in the workplace. And one of the things I loved is that you talked about when people are at stress, it impacts what they bring to the workplace. So how does stress have that impact, particularly in a manufacturing environment? What do you see as a result of that?
So, you know, when we look at health and safety in the workplace, it is safety in the short term. We want people to come with 10 fingers, 10 toes and leave, and health is more the long term of it. And actually managing safety is the same as managing health. What we say is happy, healthy, engaged people do not get into accidents. And as soon as we get stressed, you know, it has an effect on our brain. And if our hippocampus is overwhelmed, it will reduce our spacious and visual capacity. So this is then we're gonna knock things over. You know, we're gonna spill a coffee, or we're going to step, you know, off the stairs. If you are in a less risky environment, the danger is not that bad. But if you work in more manufacturing environments, you know, there's high hazardous situation, the impact can be higher. So, you know, working safe is also working mindful. And also there, the mindful practice is taking breaks, which sounds really weird if you are in a productive environment where you want to produce, where things are all measured, and, you know, it's in lines, it's automated. So the challenge is also there. Actually, we advise the same as what you know, Carrie and Shanna are advising, but you need to adapt it in your curriculum, but then the curriculum is your production process.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that one of the things that I'm now curious about is, we know that there's this individual benefit to doing mindfulness, but how do we advise bringing mindfulness into the workplace? And I know, Jennifer, you have consulted with a number of organizations where you've supported them in bringing mindfulness into the organization. Can you share with us a little bit about how you've gone about doing that?
Yes. So I think just also to marry with what Petra was saying about the impact of stress, that's what will make an organization often want to bring, you know, me in, is because when we're in stress, it's our most inflexible, rigid, and unproductive behavior. And so what is happening is we aren't as efficient, teams aren't as optimized. And I think there's a real understanding of that on a deeper level with just the water of swimming in stress for this past year. And so there's just a lot of receptivity by organizations now to say, let's bring stress management, resiliency, and mindfulness to the front of the agenda, you know, instead of this thing that we'll do if we have time. And so I think the biggest thing that is helpful in bringing it into an organization is that thing you've been discussing with all of us, Peg, about there's many ways in. And so making sure that it's not just mindful breathing and meditation, which is lovely, right? But that it also could be, you know, inhale, lift your arms, exhale, lower your arms, or it could be take a tangerine and eat it at your desk, you know, but do it in a mindful way with all the senses engaged. So I think the biggest thing that organizations are looking for is knowing that there's a lot of different ways in, and they appreciate that. I worked with a group in healthcare where I took them through guided imagery. So that's another wonderful way to activate our mindfulness capacity, is to use the imagination for good instead of the imagination for worry and catastrophic thinking and all of that. And so afterward, one of the gentlemen came up to me, he's like, I could hear the bees in Utah. You know, we were not in Utah, but in the guided imagery practice, he was able to reclaim this gorgeous memory by using all of the senses mindfully. And he was with those bees again, and just his level of stress, his level of joy, you know, just watching that change. So those are just some ways of just showing there's so many ways in a beautiful way.
Yeah. And I appreciate that, because it's, you know, if you can't get in the front door, go in a window. If you can't get in the window, go in the back door. Now, there's so many different ways of approaching it, and not even necessarily using the term mindfulness, which could be off-putting to somebody who has no idea what that really is, but really helping people to be present in the moment. You know, what are the ways that we can go about doing that? So Shana, I really want you to share with us, you had such a unique experience in terms of how you bring these kinds of practices to your law firm. And a lot of that was supported by, you know, the pledge that the ABA created. So could you share a little bit of that background and context, and then how you went about actually bringing mindfulness into your practice, into your law practice?
Sure. So the American Bar Association has done a lot of research, or sponsored a lot of research into lawyers' well-being and mental health. And what they found was that lawyers had a higher percentage of anxiety, depression, substance abuse, even suicide than you would expect in the general population. And so they created a well-being pledge for companies, you know, in-house counsel and law firms to decide whether to join. And I looked into this and I thought that actually could be really, really helpful for a practice like ours. You know, complex litigation, lots of stress. And so we joined that pledge. And then as part of that pledge, we've created several presentations for the entire law firm. And then we also did, one of them was on, one of my colleagues and I took a class online during the pandemic called The Science of Wellbeing at Yale. And it was really interesting. So one of our presentations was incorporating all the findings from that, you know, things about savoring good experiences, gratitude, things like that, and presenting that. And then we also did a really interesting workshop on well-being while working from home that your partner, 𝐦𝐨𝐫𝐞 led. That was really, really helpful. And it was kind of like micro practices of mindfulness, kind of like Jennifer was talking about before. And then because the Science of Wellbeing presentation was so popular in the firm, we decided to offer it to our clients. So, you know, giant Fortune 50 companies. And I was very surprised that that many of them were so receptive to this. So we actually gave that presentation to some of our clients as well. And all of them thought that it was really helpful, because we all are going through this collective giant stress right now. So it was a good time for it.
Excellent. Yeah, so I love this, you know, we're sort of getting the landscape of how do we bring this in and what's the receptivity, which I think is fascinating as well. So Carrie, you have introduced this notion of mindfulness into the MBA program at Booth. So tell us a little bit about, you know, where does it sit? You mentioned it's not a course curriculum per se. How is it woven through the experience of the students?
Yeah, so we focus on well-being overall, and I think that mindfulness is one of the most important tools that you can have that contributes to well-being for many of the reasons that my colleagues on here have already mentioned. And so we look to incorporate it in a variety of ways. So we have formal programs, like everyone gets a Headspace membership that is a student, and we offer midweek mindfulness sessions, which are meditation based, but they also include other mindfulness practices that students can go to. And those are just sort of ongoing programs that we have. We also, this past year, introduced a session in orientation for all of our incoming students that focused on well-being overall. And then as a sort of complement to that, we offered a session that was called the 4 Keys to Bulletproof Resiliency. And we had one of our alumni who is a mindfulness coach and really skilled, talk about mindfulness, but in the context of how to be resilient and how to build sort of protective factors so that students could be successful in their experience throughout the year. And so I would say we've had it in sort of the direct ways of mindfulness meditation, but also talking about it through the lens of resilience, how to manage, when we're talking about how to manage stress productively, things like that. And then every week we send out a wellness newsletter. And there's almost always a mindfulness tip that's in there, whether it is a quick breathing exercise or a grounding exercise that encourages you to engage all of your senses, or a reflection prompt. So we try to incorporate it in a few different ways.
Great, excellent. And Petra, lastly, how are you bringing mindfulness then into a manufacturing environment, which is unique to all of us?
Well, there are stories which are more successful than others. You can imagine that it's a different audience you look at. Most of the time, it's more male-oriented. So I did try the centering and grounding sessions once in one of the leadership programs, which worked at the spot. But I also noticed that if there's not a context for people where it is often mentioned or where it's part, we just forget it, and then breathing already becomes a thing. And we complicate it, it becomes this big thing, which is not mindfulness. So what we're looking at now is much more on addressing each other, are you here now, be here now, asking that conversation, paying attention, because if we are distracted, we most of the time don't know it ourselves because we're distracted. Right. So it is trying to build on that conversation and then also take that element of care in there, to show that you care, I care about you, and I want you to do well. So it's about having that conversation. But there is definitely also one of the risks that we don't know. How will it be if we return to work? One of the things that we know is that we are less risk adverse. We will be more complacent because we're not used to driving anymore. So many things that we used to do are not in the normal. So in a way, all of us will be exposed to a higher risk because our comfort zone is just, getting smaller and smaller. So I think there's also a lot of things which are not unknown, are unknown at the moment.
Absolutely. That uncertainty continues to permeate, even when it begins to feel on some level safe, people are vaccinated, and that should be the signal we can come back to work. There's still going to be a level of uncertainty about what's that going to look like, and do I really feel safe? And all those things will be prevalent, I think, for a while yet. So these are practices that definitely can support us through that continuing level of uncertainty. So with that, each of you is a practitioner of mindfulness, so you understand the personal benefits, and you've introduced it into organizations. So let's talk a little bit about what are the benefits organizations have experienced through actually bringing mindfulness into their everyday. So Shana, I'm going to ask you, what are the sort of anecdotal pieces of data that you have, as well as any surveys that you may have done that might indicate that there actually has been a positive impact?
Sure. So we did do a formal survey of our employees after various mindfulness presentations and well-being presentations. And what we found is that people felt overwhelmingly like we were supporting them in every way that we could, even though we're all remote. They felt like we were doing everything that we could to support them. And they really appreciated the efforts. And then people told me anecdotally that they were incorporating various mindfulness, whether it's meditation, whether it's breathing exercises when they get stressed, whether it's just as easy as getting up and going and stretching on your yoga mat for 5 minutes. So I think that those are some of the successes, and some of the more surprising successes that we heard from some of our clients were that they were also incorporating mindfulness practices into their business meetings. And one story, we gave the presentation to a large chemical company, and the person who heads litigation there is not someone that you would think would be very receptive to this mindfulness ideas and practices. But in the very next meeting after our presentation, he actually led a meditation moment in the meeting of the litigation department, which seemed to at least his colleagues like a sea change. So I just think that introducing ideas of easy ways to practice mindfulness can really be effective. And also when you tell people the science behind it, not only the impact on your brain that, you know, Petra was talking about and productivity, that it even has more of a positive impact on people.
Great. So Jennifer, picking up on this idea of doing simple practices, I know that one of the things you've observed is that when we keep it simple, that we actually amplify the kind of impact that it has. Can you speak a little bit about that in terms of the organizations that you've worked with?
Yes, absolutely. I'm thinking of a particular coaching moment with an organization member who was extremely stressed inside the conversation. And I just said, see if it would help to press your hands into your thighs, you know, in your chair, literally to re-inhabit your body, right? So being mindless, right, is sometimes being stuck in a past conversation, in the future, perseverating, all these kinds of things, and we're out of our body. And there's a beautiful teaching of if you're not in your body, you're not here. And so really seeing embodiment as a key element to mindfulness and just watching her diffuse, just, you know, by degree, by just pressing her hands into her thighs. You know, I'll be in a session with someone and we may do a little bit of brushing, just a little way that's from the sister science of yoga, Ayurveda, just a way to kind of re-inhabit your skin, you know, re-inhabit that connection. And I think too, if you know, you're going to be the one bringing it into your organization, practicing what you preach, because there'll be a felt experience of, he seems different. What's he doing? Or what's she doing? Because I like talking to her now, right? You know, there's this sense of mindfulness allows you to not be reactive in your own behavior with your colleagues. So that's often what I'll bring up when working with teams is these practices make people want to take your call. They want to be around you when they know that you're taking care of yourself, that you're going to be listening and present. And so when they see that mindfulness has all of these wonderful reverberating effects, that it's not just self-oriented, but it's also other-oriented, there's a higher receptivity to the practice. And I'll even just show my hand and just say, mindfulness is here in your hand at any moment. And just even engaging the senses that way. Carrie was talking about that as one of the practices with the MBA students of grounding is sometimes, you know, some of our senses are offline, which is even then reinforcing not being here. And so just to touch the thumb for sight, the index finger for touch, the middle finger for sound, the ring finger for smell, the pinky finger for taste, and it's quick, right? It's not this long, you've got to even leave your desk, or you can do it inside a Zoom session with your colleagues. I think it's just them being able to see how accessible it can be.
So let's talk a little bit then about, you know, we've all seen that this has impact, that it's positive, that there are ways of bringing it into organizations. Petra, you mentioned earlier that there can be some pitfalls. You know, we think we try something, it may or may not work. So let's focus a little bit on what some of the pitfalls are, or what some of our concerns are. So Shane, I'm going to go back to you and ask, you know, what were your concerns when you first contemplated this idea of bringing mindfulness to your firm?
Well, the concerns, like many things, were all in my head because what I thought was, you know, I had this story in my head that a, you know, firm of serious litigators and is not going to be receptive to this like foo-foo hippie stuff. And and I was totally underestimating my colleagues and my clients when we presented this to them as well, because you know, first of all, there's so much science and evidence behind all of this that when you present it with the data, it's hard to have that kind of reaction. And second, this is all stuff that if you actually do it and you habitually do it for 21 days or however many days it takes to form a habit, you actually see the results pretty immediately. Or even if you breathe for 1 minute, you see the results. So the pitfalls or the concerns that I personally made up in my head ended up not being true at all, and really were based on my own stereotyping of my profession, honestly.
Yep. But I think that's easy to do. It's like we can all kind of get in our own way. It's like, well, this makes sense to me, but I don't know about everybody else. And so I think it is helpful to recognize there's a lot of science, if that's what speaks to people. It's not always the reason that people will do it, but there's a lot of science, there's a lot of practical impact. And if we just give it a go, that we may be surprised by the reaction that we get, which then takes us to what surprised you in bringing mindfulness into whichever like workplace environment that you're in? What was a surprise for you? So Carrie, I'm going to shift to you and see what were the surprises that you had in doing this?
Yeah, so I think similarly to Shayna, initially coming in, I'm thinking of investment bankers as not being the first group of people to champion this. And when we did the program for orientation, which was a mandatory program, we were so surprised by the just overwhelming support of it from students, and the comments that we got of like, oh my gosh, thank you. I didn't know that I needed this. I'm so glad that Booth is investing in our well-being. And so there was really great uptake for it. And I think, there were definitely, speaking to pitfalls, sometimes when I've marketed things, to particular groups, it has been a little, too foo-foo for them. And so we've just changed it and changed the way that we talk about it so that it isn't necessarily like, let's take a mindful breath, if that's not going to resonate with them, but hey, let's take a moment to get really present here and focus on what's most important now. Just take a moment. And then we don't even say, that we're taking a breath. So I think, the surprises have been overwhelmingly positive. And then in the moments where we have found that, this didn't necessarily resonate in the way that we thought, we've just learned to change it. And I think, again, students have found it very important for them. And part of our work is we're educating leaders who are going out to lead organizations. And so we hope that they then take these practices into the organizations that they will be working within and leading.
I think that's part of what I find so intriguing about what you're doing at Booth, because you're not only supporting students in their MBA program, managing, all the demands and stresses that they have on them, which are then just further amplified right now by the fact that we're in this pandemic, but you're also infusing in them practices that they may take to the workplace, those future workplaces where they are, where they actually will have a level of influence that could actually embed some of these ideas into organizations that they'll be responsible for. So I love that we're, creating the potential for, sort of the legacy, if you will, going forward of using this kind of approach as we continue down the road here. Well, I see by our time that we're approaching the end of our virtual roundtable. So I'm going to ask each of you, if you would, to share, one piece of advice or one insight that you have about mindfulness in the workplace that you'd love for our audience to hear. So Jennifer, I'm going to begin with you, if I may.
Oh goodness, my trouble is with one.
I know.
So I'm going to first show and tell. I carry these around me. This Carrie had mentioned 𝐤𝐞𝐚𝐳𝐿. This is his book, Wherever You Go, There You Are. And what's so wonderful is it could be something on trust, right? They're just little easy paragraphs to read. So consider, buying this for your team, having it at the workplace, and it just allows a nice discussion topic like, hey, before we start our meeting today, let's read, let's just kind of practice one of these insights. And another one, I'll just do one more of that, is my sweet little beat up book that has leaves and tissues and all kinds of stuff in it. But this is Thich Nhat Hanh's work, who is instrumental in mindfulness and the practice of the simple, ordinary, everyday things that you can do for yourself, with your team. that type of thing. So, if you were looking for resources, these are gorgeous, and you don't have to read it front to back. You can literally look at, one of them is Mindfulness of Anger. So I think my big takeaway is to, at least what I'm experiencing my own practice is I'm with my suffering in a better way. There have been a lot of, personal things that have impacted me over the past several months, and how mindfulness has enabled me to be with my suffering, which then enables me to be with the suffering that my colleagues are facing, or that my clients are facing, without trying to fix it for them, but truly through the practice of mindfulness, really being able to be with the suffering. So thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. So Carrie, I'll go to you next. What final words of wisdom do you have for us?
Yeah, so I highly endorse those books as well. But one of the things that I think is really important. So if you are someone who's just starting in the mindfulness journey, as I think we've talked about today, it's something that doesn't have to be sort of that formal meditation practice. You can grow to that if that speaks to you, but mindfulness is something that can be done in any given moment. And so to start now, and to start with yourself, because that's the first place, right? In order to be able to bring it into an organization.
Great. Shayna, how about you? What would you offer as a final thought here?
Well, my experience has taught me that everyone can benefit from learning about mindfulness, and that by knowing your audience, excuse me, and what's compelling to them. So in my case, with my colleagues and my clients, the scientific data behind it is compelling. Or whatever it is that you think will be compelling to your workplace, going from that angle can help everyone to be more receptive.
Yep. And Petra, how about you?
For me, it would probably be summarized with taking as much micro breaks as you can. My life is behind Teams all day, is in these blue boxes, and are filled, and we have this illusion of being effective all the day, and we can plan every minute of the day and do something. So I think, including myself, we get lost in this illusion of being effective, being productive. So it's really about, do what you're doing, be with what you're doing. We cannot multitask. And then take breaks in between. That's just really step away, stretch your legs, and then continue to the next.
Excellent. Excellent. So this is bringing us to the end of our virtual roundtable on bringing mindfulness to the workplace. I definitely want to thank Jennifer and Carrie and Shayna and Petra for bringing your expertise and your wisdom and your own experience to this conversation, because everybody's experience is somewhat different, but I see some themes that pull through. So just as a reminder, mindfulness is bringing our attention to the present moment without judgment. Simplest explanation I have. We're all experiencing, this is a global experience of uncertainty, and that has raised the stress around the globe. And so mindfulness is one of those well-being practices that can support us in, not eliminating the stress, but certainly grappling with it and being able to be effective in spite of the fact that there is the stress that we're all experiencing. What I love is that each of you shared really wonderful ideas about how to create mindfulness practices that work throughout the day in small moments, just so that we throughout the day have that opportunity to reconnect with ourselves, get back to the present moment, and then be able to move forward. And you also touched on the idea that, that we can bring this idea to our organizations in a variety of different ways, speak to whatever it is that works for them, whether it's data or the feeling or safety, whatever is the messaging that will have them be open and embrace the idea. That's really what we want to go for. We're not so interested in having to label everything mindfulness as much as we are embedding the practices in ways that are practical and useful for people and really, really help them. So if you liked this VRT, if a virtual roundtable, and you want to see more of the work that we do at Tierra, by all means, join us at our website, tierraleadership.com. And we would love for you to join future programs. beyond that, have a really wonderful and mindful day. And thanks for joining us for today. And also, one final thank you to Sydney Alderson, who's been in the background supporting us through the production of this particular program. Thanks a lot, Sydney. Again, hope you all have a great day and stay mindful.